Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs and welcome to Focus Springfield once again for another episode of Government Matters. And today we have the incumbent governor's councillor who represents, almost all of the western part of the state, if not all of it, Tara Jacobs. Thanks very much for coming.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask all of the stupid reporter questions.
Okay.
Because if there's one position in state government that I think is shrouded in mystery, it's the governor's council. In fact, I even looked up in the state constitution the paragraph that established the governor's council, and it does not give any definition for what the councilors are supposed to do other than to counsel the governor, which I found absolutely fascinating.
Yep.
So are you completing your first term? Is
Second.
that second term? Is it a 2-year term?
Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yes.
And when I say by stupid reporter questions, I want the folks to know what your background is. I want the folks to know what your experience has been like serving on the governor's council. So what is your background?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me to define what the governor's council was. That's
No, that'll come later.
Okay. So my background, my educational background, I got a Bachelor of Science from Tufts University in social psychology research. And the research that I did undergrad was all focused on human bias in various ways, field research. And then I got an MBA from NYU, from Stern School of Business in Management and Marketing. I did tuition reimbursement while I was working full time. I got the majority of my MBA and finished it off at the end there. But that led to a career first in market research, quantitative, at a publication company called Medical Economics, and then, if you remember, Columbia House. And young'uns don't.
Columbia House is on everyone's lips right now because they just ceased being.
Well, it's been a while since they've ceased being, but yeah, no, they...
Well, they made the announcement they're no longer.
Oh, there must have been some remnant left over, but the bulk of it had died a while ago.
Yes.
Regardless, I then transitioned from heavy quantitative market research to a career in advertising, where there was still quantitative to my work, but I did much more qualitative research, and the role was called account planning, which nobody knows what that is, kind of like governor's council. I tend to pick these roles that you have to describe what it is. But really it was half brand strategy, building brands, evolving brands, writing brand briefs and creative briefs for advertising messaging, infused by consumer insight work, which was partially quantitative but largely qualitative. So understanding people and why they buy the things they buy, what their beliefs and their values are, and translate that into strategic messaging to sell the Coca-Cola or I worked on big consumer brands, but also I was at an ad agency in Boston called Arnold Worldwide, and they had the advertising account that came out of the master settlement agreement with the big 3 tobacco companies. And I was the lead brand strategist on that account. It was called Truth Anti-Tobacco. I don't know if you remember. It was
Yes.
The
PSAs, yes.
Yes. Well,
and they would say truth at the end of them.
Truth at the end of it. It started with the body bags piled up in front of Philip Morris's headquarters. I arrived a year after, when they had just run out of all the pitch work that they had done for that account. And so I was the lead strategist for phase 2 of what comes next, now that we've run out of all the creative ideas that we sold originally to win the account. What comes next? And so I evolved the Truth campaign into phase 2, which was all about, well, we don't have to get into the weeds of that. The point is, though, there was no product. It was just an idea. And so it was a social cause marketing account that was incredibly well funded because of the huge settlement agreement. And we were able to shift teens' beliefs and behaviors around tobacco. And I had a whole portfolio of consumer packaged goods and travel brands and sneakers and soft drinks, but that work was so meaningful to me that literally my husband and I, reevaluated our life goals and used the brand strategy skills to create what we called the Life Action Plan, and picked up and moved from Manhattan to Western Massachusetts. We just celebrated 20 years in North Adams from that moment. And it was driven by, literally somewhere in my house is a whiteboard still of what we scrawled then, of what our goals and what our ambitions were for life and why we moved where we moved. I wanted to get heavily involved in at the community level in being a part of doing good things that made people's lives better. And so within months of moving to North Adams, I became a commissioner on the Berkshire County Commission on the Status of Women. We joined the Rotary Club. I joined the steering committee for Big Brothers Big Sisters, a number of things, one thing leading to another. But some of the things we did too, because we moved there not knowing anyone, is we dove in on political campaigns to be volunteers, knocking on doors and making the phone calls, and made a lot of friends. And so politics became a part of the social fabric of integrating into the community. And so on the one hand, I was volunteering in all of these things, and on the other hand, involved in politics, and eventually was convinced to run for school committee. I'm still on the North Adams School Committee. I'm in my 11th year there. But I never thought of myself as a candidate up until that point. And again, one thing leading to another. When the governor's council seat originally became open 4 years ago, it was, in my mind, such an opportunity to affect positive change for communities, not just in North Adams, not just in Berkshire County, but across the entire state, with a focus on wanting to be a part of being at the table where important decisions are made that could affect our justice system in a way that made justice truly justice for all, in a way that really represented the people in the process, and with a goal towards trying to be a part of dismantling some of the systemic injustices we know are embedded in our justice system, with specific attention to the racial disparities that we know are in our incarcerated population. And I probably, if I had been less naive, I really didn't understand the full complexity of running for such a huge office, having just run for school committee where you need 50 signatures. It's very local. It's right. A very different political landscape. But I called for the papers, and I had to go out there just post-COVID when people weren't gathering, and gather 1,000 signatures from towns that are more rural than urban. Although I traveled the whole district gathering signatures that first time. But just again, one foot in front of the other, and as each challenge came, and I won that first primary and have been serving ever since. And you asked me about my experience serving, but interrupt me if I'm going on at too much of a length.
Don't worry, I will.
Okay. My hopes for what this position would offer have really been fulfilled. The work is so incredibly meaningful to me. I expected I would have to be in this role for a decade to be able to see an impact. But in reality, and I was inaugurated at the same time as Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll were, in the years that I've been serving, over a quarter of the judiciary has been confirmed while I've been at that table serving on Governor's Council. And I've been able to already see an impact that's been incredibly rewarding. And secondarily, I've really become so involved on the clemency side of the work that the Governor's Council gives advice and consent on, because this governor, out of the box, out of the gate, immediately started granting or asking council to approve pardons, including a historic blanket pardon, first time ever blanket pardon on misdemeanor marijuana simple possession. But the individual pardons especially, where we get a thick packet of information of their application and all the information. And I always talk to each applicant one-on-one to kind of hear why they need a pardon, what the impact will be. And these are real stories. These are moving stories. And the reason they need the pardon is there's always a clear burden, there's a barrier, there's an impediment. In some cases, there's the fear of deportation. The stories are incredibly moving, and and being able to follow up and say we've granted the pardon and talk to the person while they're hopeful. And a lot of times I've been waiting a very long time for this. And then talking to them when they've gotten their pardon has been some of the most meaningful and rewarding work of my entire life. And so I hope very much to continue doing it for a third term and on after that, and continue to see the work that I'm doing result in positive change for all of our communities and the safety of our communities and the experience of justice for our court-involved communities.
So do you drive out every week?
Almost every week.
They meet every week, yeah.
In the Constitution, it's every Wednesday. Our assembly's at noon.
And the lieutenant governor is heading the meeting then, right?
The lieutenant governor is our ex officio chair who chairs our assemblies. The assemblies are the meetings where we vote. And you have to be in person to vote. You can't do that remotely. You can attend our hearings remotely, but I never have. I drive to Boston almost every Wednesday.
Bless you. That's not easy.
From where I am in North Adams, that's a 3-hour each way.
Yeah.
At best, there's been times that there's accidents or whatever going on. It can be a much longer commute for me than that. But yeah, no, the driving is probably if anyone asks me what the drawbacks are, it's how many miles I put on my car and my body driving all over. Because back and forth to Boston, but also I genuinely do. I represent geographically half the state. I have the largest district outside of statewide, larger than any congressional. I represent 102 cities and towns, and I can drive from my home more than 2 hours before I leave my district. And so I am in the car an awful lot.
I think one of the issues with the Governor's Council is not exactly anonymity, but I believe that most people do not thoroughly understand the work that is done, nor are they aware of the conclusions that the council then offers to the governor. In other words, how you voted, so to speak. And I think part of this is because, and maybe if you look back 25 years to the Boston newspapers like the Globe, maybe they had reports about this, but I can tell you that out here, the only time we really heard much about the Governor's Council was at election time, and it was to re-elect someone or to elect someone. And I think one of the issues with this position is the fact that it's very important because you're making decisions that can affect quite literally thousands of people about who you put on the bench or who you put on the parole board and things like that. But I don't think that the public as a whole are as aware of those as what is happening in the legislature, for instance. What laws are being passed or what laws didn't make it, that type of thing. During your term so far, I mean, how have you had interactions with just everyday people about the work that you do? Are they aware of it to begin with, or?
No.
Okay.
Is there more?
No.
I don't want to interrupt you.
That was enough of a question. Go right ahead in.
So yes, I probably say this multiple times a day when I am talking to gatherings of community members across the district, but it's true and worth saying until hopefully one day it's not true. This is the most important elected office that hardly anyone has ever heard of. And that's always been the case, and I hope it won't always be the case. But the work of bringing transparency and awareness to this role is something I strive for every day. And I do feel like I'm making a dent, but there's so much more work to do. And it's a struggle. This district is represented by at least 4 major newspapers, 2 different NPR stations. So I do what I can, but it is a struggle to bring extra transparency and awareness in a way that broadly creates awareness. So I always encourage people, to follow my social medias. When I'm in the State House, in the chamber, in the Governor's Council chamber, and we're holding a hearing, almost always, occasionally I forget to do it, but almost always I take a snap, a picture of our nominee, and I'll post it on my Instagram. I will post results from our votes, particularly when it's Western Mass nominees, to share that they've been confirmed. And I send letters to the editor, to the newspapers, and I am out in community almost every day. And as much as this is a campaign season and I'm out in a contested primary campaigning and doing things that are fully campaign focused, I genuinely view my work as the way that I campaign, being out there and doing the things that I promised to do when you first elected me, in a way that is connecting with community, engaging community in the process. I do that in a number of ways. One is when we do have a Western Mass nominee to the bench, I hold local confirmation hearings. They're called district hearings. The Governor's Council website or web page on mass.gov will list the schedule of the council hearing at the State House and my district hearing and the time and the location on that website. I will put up posts about it. I will send out press releases about it. And I will say every local hearing I've held has been very well attended, sometimes so well attended there was standing room only and people spilling out into the halls. But still, most people have no idea it's even going on. So it's that, there's that
Right.
conundrum of how do you get it broader and broader. I spend a lot of time out in community connecting with a really diverse array of types of organizers for different types of events. Like I go to colleges, I go to high schools sometimes. I interact with organizations that are advocating for justice involved in various ways communities. So there's groups that are working who've had experience at our district courts maybe because of needing restraining orders because there was domestic violence survivor focused group or sexual assault survivor group. For our probate and family, there are organizations advocating for a fair probate and family court who have had high conflict divorces and have turned to advocacy to try to create a better and fairer probate and family. For housing court, there are organizations, including right here in Springfield. I've gone and listened to the experiences, but shared the work I do with Springfield No One Leaves, and a number of other organizations too. And I try to have at least a few times a year events that I open to the public, and I try to get the word out as much as I can, and I always partner with organizations who blast their memberships. But I've done Pathway to the Bench events in partnership with each county's bar association, as well as a defense attorney or association in Springfield not too long ago. So I've done a number of Pathway to the Bench events, and those are to have lawyers who are interested in how does one become a judge, what's the application process, come and demystify the process, have decision makers at the table to share each stage of what the process looks like and ultimate decision makers. I've brought judges as well and members of the Judicial Nominating Commission, representation from the governor's legal office, almost always the chief legal will come out along with a deputy. I've done a thing in Springfield in collaboration with Focus Springfield, actually, who recorded it, and it's up on YouTube. But we did a two-part panel discussion on Pathway to Pardons, because so few people understand. So much of this is so opaque and murky to people. So people really don't know, how do you get a pardon in the state? And the motivation for that event when I did it, and I've done others that weren't televised but that are just in community, and quite a number in our prisons as well, in commutation for incarcerated population too. But when I first organized that first Pathway to Pardons event, it was motivated because far fewer than even 100 applications had come in that year, about 20 pardon requests, about 40 commutation requests, or maybe I have that reversed. But it was in that kind of very tiny sample size of applicants coming in. And we know there's literally hundreds of thousands of people in the state who would benefit from a pardon or an expungement or a sealing because, something that happened often, almost always, like more than 2/3 of the time when they were a teenager, is now a barrier in various ways to education access or housing access or employment access or just being able to volunteer at your kid's school and be a soccer coach for your kid's team. And then sometimes, like I mentioned, things that are really like, you're risking deportation if we don't grant it. But it shouldn't be a secret. It should be something people understand. And so I do what I can in educating on my work, what the Governor's Council is and what we do, why it's important, what my role is, but then literally the granular aspects of what comes through council that benefits people directly and how can they know more about it and be engaged in it. And I do it to educate, but also I do it's a two-way back and forth communication. I want to hear people's lived experiences. I often insert that directly into the vetting with hypotheticals that were drawn directly from the stories they share in vetting judges and clerk magistrates and other roles. But also, I push out, in addition to working with bars to try to recruit judicial applicants, organizations that are actively in the courts on a regular basis advocating are great sources for helping identify who are the kinds of judges we want to see. So you see a lawyer in action and you see something in them. A lot of times the people who make the best judges are so humble, they don't see themselves in that light. They need to be surrounded by people influencing and persuading them to apply. And so I ask them to be a part of that recruiting process. And I also ask them to be part of the vetting process beyond the hypotheticals and literally extracting from them, if you were in my role and you were able to hold a hearing and ask your own questions of a nominee, what would you ask? And I have a growing binder of questions that I've solicited from across the district in so many different diverse perspectives and voices. And so often those questions lead me to a deep dive, go down a rabbit hole, because they come from a place where they have worked on this so long and so closely and so intimately that they are drawing on research I didn't know exist. So I will end up reading white papers and research reports and watching documentaries that I hadn't heard of and reading books I hadn't thought of or hadn't known existed, because the questions aren't superficial. They're always so nuanced and so deeply tied to the day-to-day experiences people are having in our various courts. And so I do the best I can to, and yet there's still so much work to do. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So you probably, if you've lived here in Western Massachusetts for 20 years, you probably are aware of the overall feeling of inequity in state resources, understanding. I once interviewed a prospective reporter, and she says, I'm from Methuen, and I was so surprised about just how built up it is out here. I said, thank you very much. So do you see that inequity of East versus West in your role as a governor's council?
So that is I won't say necessarily daily in terms of the State House, because I'm in the State House about once a week. But when I'm in the State House, I've become something of a broken record, advocating for Western Mass, highlighting the regional inequity, highlighting all the places in which there's an unfair lack of voice and representation from Western Mass at the statewide level. So our SJC, Supreme Judicial Court, it's going to be 10 years in 2027 that we haven't had someone from Western Mass represented on the 7-member SJC. We do have representation at the appeals court, but it's still underrepresented comparatively. We could use at least one more, and Hampden County doesn't have a voice at the appeals court. Land court is another statewide court, and the parole board. And the parole board, it's one of the main reasons I voted no recently. There's a number of reasons I voted no recently on the parole board nominees that came through, but for both community reasons, our communities are uniquely different than Boston. We have many of the same, we use the same language to talk about the problems. There's substance use, there's mental health, the same words, but what that looks like on the ground is different out west than it is in Boston, even though we're using the same words to describe it. So one thing is really understanding at the granular level what our different Western Mass communities are struggling with that ends up before the parole board. But also, two other things. Logistically, our parole board members are working 80 plus hours a week each, largely doing their work, but then driving all over Massachusetts. And most of them are Boston area. And so at this point, 5 of the 7 parole board members have come through council since I've been on. And so I have strong relationships with all of them. And a lot of them, when they think of me when they're driving to the Berkshires for the House of Corrections in Pittsfield. And so, oh, I should call the Berkshire counselor and check in. And so I'll hear they're in the car. They've got a 2.5 or 3 hour drive one way, heading out to have parole hearings at the House of Corrections in Pittsfield. And then they're going to have 2.5, 3 hour drive home. And if we had a balanced board from a regional standpoint, they could do more efficient scheduling of who goes where. A Western Mass person to the Western Mass. We don't have a prison in Western Mass. Our closest prisons are Gardner and Shirley. But even still, they could figure out a way to actually bring down how many hours they're spending just in the car to do their work. And then a third level is, so there's the parole board, and then there's the parole department, where there are so many parole functions happening, including field supervision. And I've looked at the data dashboard for the parole board and parole supervision, and they do break it down, not quite the same way as Governor's Council, but they break it down regionally. And when you look at the numbers for the Springfield's, specifically Springfield's parole field, which does cover a large, it's not just Springfield, it covers a large area. It includes Holyoke, it includes some radius that I wouldn't even speak to what all is inclusive in that region. I think they call it Region 9 or something. But all the statistics are skew worse compared to the rest of the state, worse than Boston, worse than Worcester, on things like metrics like number of parolees violated. So they've violated a condition, and violation can mean any number of things. One of those things is being re-incarcerated. Our numbers for Springfield in the state are the highest for reincarceration. Things like putting on a GPS tracker, an ankle bracelet, our numbers are highest for number of people who are actively monitored by GPS trackers. There's a number of things that are disturbing trends to see. Why is Springfield over-indexing compared to the rest of the state on all of these measures that suggest that there's something more conservative and harsher going on for Western Mass? And so for that reason too, I think the parole board would be benefited from having someone from Western Mass sitting there, understanding the nuances of the differences, Springfield, Holyoke, or other communities, and having an eye as to, beyond just representational inequities, what kind of actual on-the-ground inequities in how that aspect of justice is being carried out on the ground and within our communities. And so, and the list goes on. And to a degree, it's just, I'm just there waving the Western Mass flag, even when talking to legislators, because I've made relationships across the state, not just, I'm very close with our Western Mass legislative delegation, but in doing the work around justice that I've been doing, I've made friendships with Somerville and all over, and so, yeah, I am the little flag waver of regional, the inequities that exist, and the correction of assumptions about what our lives are, sometimes which are jokes, but I think jokes have a grain of truth where, people ask me if I have chickens, do I have goats, do I pump my water? There's a little house in the prairie perception of Western Mass. And also just a mischaracterization of Western Mass, like, oh, Worcester, keep going.
Yeah. Springfield,
yes, but keep going, there's more, So, yeah, I do what I can.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in today, because I think the more information that people get, not only about the candidates, but also the jobs that the candidates want, is absolutely vital this election season. It's a very important election.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And folks, thanks very much for watching this episode of Government Matters right here on Focus Springfield.